Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. Andrzej Bobkowski was a huge phenomenon in Poland in the early 1990s for a book he had written in the 1940s, and about 30 years after he had emigrated to Guatemala. During his long period of emigration, he had some correspondence with Polish editors such as Jerzy Giedroyć at Instytut Literacki in Paris and Jerzy Torowicz from the independent Catholic weekly Tygodnik Powszechny based in Kraków, which played a major role in exposing and resisting censorship during the communist years. And both of them encouraged him to write during all that time. But his wartime notebooks are what brought him fame about a year before he died of cancer. He was seen as one of the great stylists of post-war Polish prose like Iwaszkiewicz or Andrzejewski, but who had gone unrecognized for decades. Let's get into it with Grażyna Drabik, who teaches American literature at City College and Macaulay Honors College at the City University of New York, with special interest in the literature of immigration and exile. Drabik's translations of Polish poetry into English and Portuguese have appeared in numerous literary journals and anthologies in the United States and Brazil, including in Polonia, edited by Gidi and Rubem Cesar Fernandez, Revista Brasilia, the Massachusetts Review, Modern Poetry in Translation, and the Bedford Anthology of World Literature. A book-length selection of Wisława Szymborska's poems was published in Quarterly Review of Literature in 1982 and of Anna Kamieńska's poems Astonishments from Paraclete Press in 2007. Together with Laura Engelstein, she prepared the English edition of Andrzej Bobkowski's Wartime Notebooks, France 1940 to 1944, from Yale University Press in 2018. She is the editor of the blog All the World's a Stage, hosted on the platform of the Polish Theater Institute of New York, where she also writes a regular column of theater criticism. Grażyna asked me if I could use a hello clip recorded in Hawaii at the top of the show, and she also asked me where I like to go hiking in Hawaii. So we started this episode with a clip at Manoa Falls on Oahu. Let's go to the discussion that we recorded a few weeks ago. Grażyna, it's great to have you here on Encounters with Polish Literature to talk about Andrzej Bobkowski.
Hello.
Bobkowski was really kind of an unknown figure in Poland in much of the 20th century. Could you fill us in a little on maybe a very brief biography, and how do he and his new wife, Basia, end up in France, and what is he doing there?
You are very much right, highlighting that he was obscure in Poland for such a long time. Right? He entered public forum in Poland at the very end of the 20th century. And his family background is interesting that it kind of combines two very different strands of Polish cultural experience and identity. If you look at the picture, this is the family, Henryk Bobkowski, in full splendor of his officer's uniform, very young boy, Andrzej Bobkowski, born in 1913. So he was born in Wiener Neustadt, so it's still Austria. And his mother, elegant, gentle figure, panienka z dobrego domu. The lady, the young girl from the good family.
From a good home.
Yes, exactly. So you're also looking at the mesalliance on both sides. On the side of Henryk's family, it was mesalliance because it was a staunch, long tradition, well-established Protestant family, prominent in Krakow. So it was like Galicia in its splendor of urbanity. Family of engineers, lawyers, officers. And so he was marrying someone out of this, right? It was also mesalliance on his mother's side because she was from Szlachta. She was from small nobility. She was from the landed people. A small property near Wilno was the mainstream of this family, right? And very much linked with Wilno, with culture, with arts, with music, and with Warsaw. That was the main point of reference for them. She was moving all the time among Polish writers, musicians. They spent time in Nałęczów. That's where they crossed with Żeromski, among other things. So she was very much... Her sister, very beautiful Wanda, married one of the most prominent figures of the between the war period of avant-garde theater, Juliusz Osterwa. That was exactly. So here was Andrzej Bobkowski with a kind of fusion between those two, but also full of tensions between those two. Right? And perhaps also profiting from those two very different strands, right? On his father's side, he was taught hunting, horse riding, maps, skiing. His godfather was a very prominent kind of initiator of alpine skiing. That was part of maps. All of this big world, right? Very much on his father's side. On his mother's side, it was high art and theater and music. So, and he kind of he dramatized it in one of his presentations that he felt that he was being raised on the electric arch, right? Full of danger also and conflict and clashes, but also full of those diverse strands for him. So it's interesting. Also, if you think about the landscape of his childhood, it's complicated in this sense. It's not only Krakow and Warsaw and Vilnius, but also at the beginning especially, it was military career, so he moved a lot. Tomaszów Lubelski, his earliest memories as a child, but also Lida, also Toruń, also, yes. So that's a landscape.
And is this how he learned so many languages?
Part of it was, yes. Part of it was this, exactly. Part of it was by osmosis, just by the family. Part of it was also part of his education at home. Both father and mother took care that he speaks perfect German and perfect French, including sending him abroad for the summer breaks on this. Plus, something else which I have to add, they decided, when he was a teenager, they decided to send him to Krakow, not to be stationed in Modlin with his family, but they sent him to Krakow to enter the best high school at that time in Poland, which was St. Anne's High School, which later changed into name which has resonance for many people, Nowodworski High School. Became a kind of symbolically ending, and he entered it studying classic element of it. So it means Latin, it means Greek, it means French. So yes.
How did he and Basha end up in Paris?
I'm sorry, there's no simple answer to any of your questions regarding Bobkowski. No, but short. Well, double drama. Number one, his marriage. He kind of repeated with his own marriage the larger family trouble, right, of mesalliance, and again on both sides. They met when he didn't pass his matura. He didn't pass his matura because he didn't study. Most of his time in the last year of high school, he just, did his thing, insubordinate, problematic, troublemaker. But it was a shock. He didn't pass. Well, he had to return to school. He started studying seriously. And his parents also gave him a person to help him with some of the subjects. And it happened to be Basha. She was from... Exactly. So here we have Protestant Krakowians, right? Galicia, military, blah, blah. Here we have mother, right? Vilno. Now, Basha is impoverished, similar, but impoverished, small mobility. Drama there in families. She is widowed. She was widowed very early. She is widowed. Here she is. Almost no support system with children in Krakow. 4 girls, 2 boys.
Right.
By herself, she manages to educate all of them. One of them is Basia, but very, very tight, very, very simplified kind of lifestyle, right? None of the flair on either of the side of Bobkowski's family, right? So on both sides. And actually, it was probably very much, marriage was probably one of these defiant gestures on the part of Bobkowski. Well, so they were connected when he was studying for baccalaureate, for the high school diploma. They maintained this relationship, so it must have been a strong relationship when he was studying in Warsaw, because she was in Krakow. And actually, family was very, very eager for him to study in Warsaw, in part thinking that natural they will separate. Well, the relationship endured. He completed, he was studying School of Economics in Warsaw. He completed his studies. He got his first job in Silesia, in Katowice. And 26th of December, 1938, very, very atypical date for wedding. It's Christmas, very atypical. Very simple annunciation. His family actually learned post factum. We married right with the annunciation. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the drama. Second drama is much more complicated, and it really enters into largely still unknown bracket of his life. There must have happened something dramatic in the place of employment. He was employed in Huta Laura in Katowice. We don't really know about it yet. Hopefully, it will be discovered. I may mention it later, right, about this possibility. Some financial problem, some corruption problem, perhaps some spying problem. In a most dramatic way, without farewells to his family, Basia and Andrzej, with minimal suitcase, leave Poland by train, hiding, emerge in Paris in March of 1939. One more element, with hope of getting to Argentina. So actually they left Poland, number one, escaping legal situation, entanglement, which was helped by his uncle to even facilitate it, to manage all of it, right, of this escape. But he was going with vision of himself and Basia going to Argentina, to Buenos Aires. Mm-hmm. It's a vague promise of a job in the same kind of group which was linked with this Huta Laura in Silesia. So there was a chance for him, for the second chance, right, offered, right? But that was the exit from Poland, with a vision of going to Buenos Aires, right, for the potentially continuation of the professional career.
What is he doing in Paris? How does he support himself?
Very, very interesting, because I think from March what happened to him, and I think this is really his beginning of his youth, as a period when you become adult, right? He was a student, he was an intern, right? He did something wrong, right? He escaped. And I think he's now serious about something. And what he's serious about is self-education. And I think one of the striking things of reading his dziennik is his incredible facility with which he moves in the literary sphere, right? I think that's already part of this incredible self-education. He reads and reads and reads. The first document which he has is a French document is library card. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting from my point of view of Bobkowski as a writer, he identifies himself as with classical education and as journalist. So it's kind of a closest to perception of writer as he can imagine at this point. right? He doesn't put a writer there. He actually refused to accept this will with this word until the end of his life. But it closes, right? The professional observer, professional reporter. So that library card. They have some funds. They have some funds from a family who was actually, right, sheltering him and trying to give him new direction. And he does some odd jobs. But look at the date. What we are really talking about is a new drama, a third drama which enters his life right now. Not only his, but now we are talking about history. And until now, we were talking about personal dramas. Now we are talking about specific context in which it all happens, right? It's September 1939. And whatever freedom of movement he had until now, right? It's much more difficult now. The Poland is invaded. The war already began. It did not begin in France. France is still all part of normal, but the war already began. The visa to Argentina doesn't come through. The job in Buenos Aires doesn't come through. The funds are ending. The family in Poland now has problems. So that's where we are now beginning with the book, which is our topic.
The Wartime Notebooks. What kind of text is this? I mean, it's presented as his personal notebooks, but it seems to contain all kinds of genres. I mean, it includes travel narrative, like a travelogue. Sometimes it's like he's giving a theater review, and sometimes it's his own personal feelings, like we expect from a personal narrative, and then sometimes it's a philosophical disquisition, and it's really a grab bag of genres in this one very substantial work.
I think you're highlighting something very, very important, and which I think is one of the most valuable things about the book. This combination of the breadth of observation, this multiplicity of strengths which we can identify. Some of them you already enumerated. Multiplicity of genres. It's kind of compendium of things. And we can identify, we probably should talk a little bit more about the major themes, right? But for now, what's striking, all of it is actually coheres together in a very harmonious, unified thing. So this diversity somehow weaves a coherent one book. So that's what's quite striking.
And yet he doesn't have a plan for it at the beginning because he can't know what's going to happen. I mean, the unity has to come from his own personality, from his own internal motivations.
Yes, and I think unity comes that he's aware of the three major strands he's weaving. But it has a spontaneity of the daily recordings. But I think unity is that he's pretty clear of those major themes which he's observing and noting and thinking about. One of the...
What do you see as the major themes?
I would identify it as three fields of interest. One would be, of course, the war. Absolutely. The war in its multiple forms. The war which is happening on the fronts, which he presents. He's pretty attentive, right, on marking just military movements, literally almost, you can almost see it mapping, right, the front lines, changes of it, and so on. Another aspect of the war is all the informations about it, speeches, some of them which reproduce, debates about it, some of it which reproduce, observations of the daily of the war, right? How does it change the Paris of this time? So, the war. But also, the war is part of the war, especially as a war unfolds further and further, not longer only German occupation of Paris, which would be forefront of this war, is observed, but also the war is a kind of clash of cultures. And here he does, with great consistency and with great insistence, here he does a very clear cut. This is Nazism, German fascism, and Soviet communism on one side, and the remnant of Western civilization on others. Interesting context, right? It's not Germany against whatever, right? It's an ally, two aberrations of European thought. And he has a problem of this because he recognized European roots for both of them in Marxism, right? And in forms of German. But it's very clear for him that this is a totalitarian ideology which is counter to all what Europe, as he understands it, Western Europe, Western civilization, idealized classical humanism, Greeks, Christianity, individual responsibility, right? That's this pinnacle of it is French civilization, French culture. So, right? But French culture is a symbol of this achievement of this, right? Of this Western. So here it is, the context. It's one huge field of his consistent interest, reflection, and observations. War is occupation, war is, right, military action, and war as this contest between fascism, communism, and humanism, let's call it.
So the first major theme, of course, the big historical theme, is the theme of the war, with where he sees Soviet communism and German fascism on one side and European civilization on the other side. What do you see as the other major themes?
Well, the second, what I call for myself, right, to deal with this multiplicity of themes, the second field of interest would be France. And especially culture of France, right? But also the beauty of France, right? And here we have very much this emotional tangle of immense entanglement, fascination, and pleasure in participating in his culture. And gratitude to France, because many times in various forms he repeats, I was formed by France. I came to France as a young boy, right? Not really knowing much about life. And I really learned. I became the man. I also became a free man in France. So there's this entanglement of personal and cultural, right, with France. Great appreciation of French literature, great appreciation of elegance of life, great appreciations of pleasure of life. The moments of just having the cool wine glass in his hand, right, and soaking sapphire of sky, right? And the pleasure. All of it for him is contained in this word France, right? At the same time, continuous reevaluation of it. What war did to France. Right? And reevaluation of certain decadence of this culture, giving in to temptations, giving in to passivity. So France, right, with so numerous themes within this. And in a similar vein, a little bit less, but in a similar Poland. So that would be a second thing, with a similar involvement of profound love. It's my country. I am a Pole, absolutely, right? And with incredible criticism of what it means, with impatience to hypocrisy of his social class, essentially. Perhaps the harshest words of criticism are exactly for his own social class, right? And as it appeared to him in some moments of encounters in Paris during his trip in France also. So that would be a second field, again, with richness of different themes within it, right? And with this critical reevaluation of some of those characteristics. And the third one is the most personal in terms of perhaps reflection on himself. It's his own growth. It's his own change. It's his own relearning of who he is. So that's like a journey of self-reflection. That's like a journey of transformation. And I would add, this is also as a journey of becoming a writer. So very different fields, right? However, perhaps this unity is exactly because they intersect. The war and the denunciation of war and denunciation of ideological thinking, be it fascism or being communism, is linked with appreciation of those values, which he sees as being lost when he talked about France, or not being appreciated when he talks about Paul. Again, with his own self-growth, right, in appreciation of ordinary life, appreciation of individual life against ideologies, any ideology, right? And the book becomes kind of ode to ordinary life and kind of ode to person, to individual right to happiness and a joy of life. So this is this kind of paradoxical notebook of war, at the same time being incredibly beautiful, rich.
Maybe you'd like to read a passage just to, give a sense of what,
But before we do this, I wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
I know that you've read the book, and I wanted to ask whether you say some of those things which I'm talking about, and how was your reaction to the book?
Well, I mean, my sense was that, I'm kind of drawn in two directions. Thinking about, how everyday life is portrayed, which is something of interest to me in general. I just recorded another episode about Rachel Auerbach, for instance, who is documenting life in the Warsaw Ghetto. And she's working in a soup kitchen, and she's writing down stories every day. And these are people in desperate circumstances, right? These are people who, see the transports to the death camps, the concentration camps. They have maybe one bowl of soup, for their family, for the day. And her role is to represent these people as sort of symbolic of what life was like for the community at the time. And here, on the one hand, we're getting, he's bicycling through the south of France, and there's all this abundance, and there's wine everywhere, and he meets a Polish sausage maker who loads up the bicycle with salami and cheese and wine, and he's going to the theater, and he's going to hear music, and he's going to gallery exhibitions, and he's he's reading extensively, going through all of Sienkiewicz and Balzac, and even has time for the 10-volume memoir of Balzac's lover, which I thought was particularly extravagant. So on the one hand, we think, well, but there's a war going on, and there are only a couple of, he says, he talks about the deportation of Jews at the Val d'Hiver, the velodrome, where Jews, mostly immigrant Jews, because of course it's always easiest to deport the immigrants first, are gathered in this sports complex and then sent east to Auschwitz and wherever else. He says, I have no words for that, because it is unspeakable. But yet he has, all these words for Balzac, and we want to know, kind of what his reaction was. On the other hand, we could understand that this is some kind of defense of the human spirit, right? That in spite of the war, he can, still what are we fighting for, right? He has a long passage about how, the enemy of totalitarianism is culture, right? And so culture as a kind of defense. And we think of, say, Erich Auerbach in Istanbul writing Mimesis, right, during the war, and writing about ancient Greek culture and so forth, that's the positive side of that defense of what humanity is. So it's complex and interesting. I thought that was my general reaction.
I would add to it something else, and again, I would put what can be seen as criticism. Right? You are talking about war, talk about the harshness of war, but I would put it also as the praise what makes this book special. Mm-hmm. War happens different for different people. And war happens at different moments for different people. War for Poland, and if you were a young man in Poland, he probably would be by that time dead. Or he would be dead soon by the end of the book. Because it was exactly his cousin was RAF fighter, dead in 1944. Mm-hmm. Another cousin, similar thing, right? Another cousin escaped, became an emigre in France, right? A lot of his generation people were the ones who ended up dead. That's a war.
Yes.
A war which we know. That's a war which we celebrate or not, or mourn every occasion, right? The war for Poland, we mentioned that it started 1st of September. But it also started 17th of September, completely different war for different people. At the same time, you were in Paris. If you didn't read the news, did it change for you? Did war start? Look at the street. These people are going to work or coming from work. Is there war? People are sitting in cafe. Someone is serving. Someone brought the food to cafe. That's a street in Paris in the middle of a war, probably 1943 or something like this. Is there war? I'm thinking about what happened, even in Warsaw on the 1st of September. If you are the mother, you are thinking, I have to have milk for my child. Mm-hmm. And as long as I can do it, that's also part of the dynamic of the war. Incredible diversity, how it comes and how it catches you by the throat, and how much you witnesses to happening to others. And when it stopped being witnessing to happening to others, when it started happening to you in a tragically obvious way. But what he is saying, the war is here. Look at those guys. Mm-hmm. These are the owners of this city. That's what he's saying through his book from the beginning. War comes on quiet cat's feet. That's what he's saying. And that's what he's noting in Paris. How the war diminishes French. How the war humiliates you. It doesn't have to kill you. It humiliates you. The war is darkness, which you enter and you still have to survive. But you are in darkness. The most beautiful symbolic element of this you have. You spoke about being in the south. But it was south. And it was a zone libre. It was zone libre. Mm-hmm. It was south. What it means south, colors and wine and beauty and life and sun. Yes. Is there war? But then, remember when he crosses in the Alps, how he enters.
Yes.
Remember how he enters the frontier now, back to non-zone free? And it's literally like moving from the sun of freedom, sun of life, he would say, into entering into darkness of regimentation. The symbol there which he's using is a noise of boots walking through the city, the marching boots coming there, right? That's the rhythm of war. That's the rhythm of war. Even here, sort of, when you see it, you can hear the rhythms of boots walking over you, around you. And actually the images, weather helps him also because the sun is cut, it's rain, and darkness. And now he's entering the war under occupation, France under occupation. So it's this paradoxical nature of war. War is not just obvious destruction. War is not just bombing. And, I would add, war is not heroism or dying. War is also this picture here. War is darkness and humiliation and so on. So rats suddenly taking over your street. Neighbors denouncing you for others. People quarreling online. Right? I mean, that's what he's describing when he's talking about occupation in Paris specifically, right? How it diminishes their lives and diminishes what life should mean.
So let's look at some passages. What would you recommend?
Or maybe one very short, which is characteristic for one of the tones he's occasionally using, a very, very brutal generalization, kind of summing up a point which he wants to do with extra strength. So it would be July 17th, 1944.
He says, I no longer remember who used the phrase tetragon of stupidity, but it's great. Except how much power will be needed to smash all the tetragons that are lining up these days one after the other. Tetragons of lying, hypocrisy, mistaken ideas, mystifications, one and only true ideologies. Our civilization, appearances to the contrary notwithstanding, does not sin so much in deed. It sins horribly in thought and speech. I am suffocated by the floods of hatred I feel for the stupidity of my age. The shit rises in my gorge as in a strangulated hernia, writes Saint Flaubert in a different letter. Tragically, it's not the proletariat or the plebes who are stupid, but the so-called enlightened classes who are becoming stupider by the minute. The enlightened classes need to be enlightened, writes Flaubert in yet another letter. Begin with the head. It's the sickest. The rest will follow on its own.
And it's very typical for what he's doing, right? He's quoting Flaubert. He's quoting from Flaubert, which he actually considers the most important, right? So it's not even from his work, but from his letters. And he's using it to criticize the elites, not the ordinary people. Right? So those who should know better, those who consider themselves enlightened, and they are the ones who give in to ideology. And again, his main point here is ideological thinking, simplified thinking, or what you would say, non-thinking, just following, right? Which is space, right? It makes you stop thinking, just follow, just give in, right?
Following dogma, he says.
Well, I wanted to return to this theme which we only marked, right, of this growth which he experiences and of transformation which he knows. And part of it for me is connected very much with these notations which he does, which is a difficult labor, which is a demanding challenge, and then, kind of creating something out of this multiplicity of impressions, observations, reflections, right? So it's what in short is becoming a writer. So I wanted to place it in the context of his travels in the South.
Yes.
And makes one detour, right? He selects his route of return to Paris from evacuation after the session, right? We have to go to Paris. He selects a route which is both relatively safe, right? By bike. Beautiful. So let's say, before I go back to prison of war, occupied Paris, let me experience the beauty of the South. So that's why this southern journey. But he makes one detour on this route. Actually, two detours. One is a quick one-day visit Monte Carlo. We could hear the echo of his grandmother saying, well, you don't really know the pleasure of life before if you didn't win or lost in the casino in Monte Carlo, because she spent some but also just the pleasure of being in a place, right? What it symbolized. But another detour is of much more interest to us, and I think is much more pertinent to his life in general, right? It's kind of part of how he wants to define himself. And it's a very surprising detour, because he wants to visit Bandol because of one specific figure. We started our conversation highlighting that he was largely obscure in Poland so long, right? Well, now he wants to pay the tribute to the person who was also very obscure in Europe. And actually, for me, it's one of my pleasure of working on Bobkowski, discovering this connection.
Mm-hmm.
My own connection, which is not a topic of our conversation here, but I have my own connection, a complicated, beautiful connection with Catherine Mansfield.
Okay.
And I didn't notice this when I was doing translation, because I was so involved in the power of translation that it was just one more episode with which we had to deal in how to translate it well. But then, when I was looking for illustrations, when I was looking in archives, I visited all the archives in Poland, I noticed postcards, several postcards of Bobkowski to one of his, became friend, but it's like a sister of Basia, of his wife. And they referred a couple of times to Catherine Mansfield. And I thought,
right,
something young Polish gentleman who only quotes and only reads great male writers, who doesn't
right,
who in his letters very often disparages women. When he asked for review of his Schizepiórkiem, he put just one condition into Wiadomości in London: please don't give review to the woman, right? So suddenly, he with equal praise, he really finds only a couple of great writers whom he greatly admires, right? Conrad, Flaubert, right? With equal praise and with self-identity, he identifies with Catherine Mansfield.
The tiny cottage next to Pauline is where Catherine Mansfield lived. A small stone table, a miniature terrace no bigger than a bedside rug. On this table, she wrote that down below on the sea, a warship had dropped anchor, that the day was gray and cold. A few words, I remember and I don't remember. There was a war then, too. I remember the inscription on her grave in Avon. But I tell you, my lord fool, out of this nettle danger we pluck this flower safe. And I managed to do this too, safe and sound. I plucked the flowers, avoiding the thorns of danger. I sat down at the little table and looked around. Would I be able to describe the view as simply and naturally as she did? Good, honest prose is like a dress from the house of Paquin or Molineux, a little nothing that says everything. Something entirely elusive. They are activated grenades that the author gives the reader, crams into him, so they detonate inside. The longer they keep on exploding, the greater the writer. Such spectacular explosions around the reader can indeed be spectacular, can deafen him for a while. But in the end, not much remains of them.
He extends it a little bit, adding one more element to it, which again, I think is very characteristic for, on the long term, what he's trying to do. When he's in the mountains, a few days later, after Bandol, obviously here, in this passage, he already defines the writer is really the one who observes. The writer is the observer, and the one who observes and sees more than others. So that's kind of first, very much self-definition of the writer, right? And then the writer is who tries to put it in such a way that it works inside the reader, not around it, not the spectacular, right, of writing, not the fireworks of style or whatever, but how it enters the reader, right? But he ends a note to this, I would call it a kind of mystical, or something which I'm sure you already noticed. It comes in several times when there's experience of extraordinary peace and extraordinary awe, enchantment with life. It's very often difficult to articulate, right? Just like catching in a feeling. And it can happen in nature, right? The beauty of nature. It can happen pleasure of moment of rest at the cafe table, right? With a glass of wine. It can happen in whatever, right, environment. But what's interesting for me, again, it's connected with Mansfield again, one of those mystical kind of moments. So just a few days later, he now is in the middle of splendor of the mountains. It's September 27th, and he's hearing the landscape. So he describes a little bit this, paysage which he's in, and then said, as I look, I have the sense of hearing an older, wise, and beautiful woman who is talking to me in a deep, level voice, and her every word rims with experience and emotion. At other times, it strikes me as a splendid tale that creates a mood, dense and straightforward, like the stories of Ivan Bunin and Katrin Mansfield, in which nothing happens, and yet so much has occurred, in which the pages are written not from left to right, but in depth, a bottomless depth.
If I could ask you, what was it like doing this as a collaborative translation with Laura Enkelstein? How did that work?
Well, you see already in richness and diversity of tone, which we even just those couple of quotes, right?
Right.
It was a very, very exciting project and very challenging one, complicated also by the length of it. Laura brought to it the depths of her knowledge, historical knowledge, the kind of broadness of the context of the just knowing the epoch. That's her specialty. It was really her project, her initiative, very much. I was very reluctant, I must admit, I was very reluctant to undertake it. I was daunted by the length. I never translated prose. So I come from translating poetry. A book of this length was almost inconceivable for me. So it was very much complicated in this sense, in collaboration. But I think we combined our strengths. And in this sense, it became a very positive challenge, which was exciting to find some resolutions, was frustrating to be able some of the satisfactory resolutions, including the title.
I know the title isn't a literal translation, which would be something like Sketches with the Pen or something like that, but that's too long.
I was looking at some of the titles he himself was playing with, right? Because it was one of the original fragments titled this way, one of the first fragments which was published in 1945. The first fragment of it was published in 1945, and it was one of the titles he used. But he used different titles for different fragments, and he played with different titles for the book. One of the titles which he played was simply Dziennik France, Notebooks of France. Another was simple France 4044. As you notice, he's avoiding the word war, right? So it's much more. But he has one title which he also tried, was Wojna i spokój, the war and peace. But that's English, it sounds too much like Tolstoy. In Polish, no, because it's really war and calm, war and rest, right?
War and quiet, yeah, right.
So he finally ended up with Szkice-piórkiem, and I think it's a fantastic title, but it's truly untranslatable. You are right. The literal translation, the correct translation is Sketches with Pen and Ink. But Szkice-piórkiem evokes lightness, evokes something for me like the Montaigne essays. Essays, right? You never conclude. You never propose something finished. It's something which you do. When I say Szkicepiórkiem, I see the page of Norwid's drawing, and you have a beautiful, you have a broken head, right? And you have a clown, and you have. When I say Szkicepiórkiem, I see a notebook of Leonardo da Vinci, where you have anatomy of a face, and another sketch which you can premonition of the smile of Mona Lisa, right? But it's sketches.
What are you working on next? I mean, are you doing any more translation, or are you sticking to your own writing, or what are you up to these days?
I am back to poetry.
Okay.
So I'm translating extraordinary Brazilian poet. So it's a very
into Polish.
So it's a very different challenge and very different pleasure.
Okay. And may I ask which poet?
Adelia Prado.
Okay.
My first non-collaborative project, which is also new for me. All translations I've done collaboratively, which I loved, actually. Each one of them presented its own, difficulty and its own tremendous satisfaction. It's the first time, right, I'm doing it on my own, so it's also a very new project. And it's the first time I'm translating a large selection into Polish, so it's a very different. But Szkicepiórkiem, it has another co-author to it. I want to mention to you now, in your capacity of, bringing all those different things to attention in your project. It wouldn't exist. This project, I mean, it existed in 1947 already. He finished the manuscript in 1947, the first version of the manuscript. It was supposed to be published by Czytelnik for the Christmas of 1948. His mother actually got some money already for the manuscript. She got the first payment. She was supposed to get a second payment the following month, October of 1948. And she was supposed to get the full payment by Christmas of that year when it was going to be published. It happened 1949. Two things happened: the clamping of control in Poland from the relative period of possibilities. And also he wrote another very passionate text, which was published in Kultura, and he became forbidden name. So, but between 1948 and 1957, when it was finally published, a lot happened.
Of course.
A lot happened. Not only the war ended, not only that he left Guatemala, not only, right, all of those life things, but also he became a different man. So the book, in this sense, is still notations of the time, but it's also reworked in various ways. But one more element, and that's what I wanted to appeal to you in this sense, it wouldn't happen without Giedroyć. It wouldn't happen.
Of course.
So I kept on thinking about it. We talk about Polish literature, we talk about writers, but it wouldn't happen without people like Giedroyć. Literally.
Of course.
Because a number of times he sent requests to Bobkowski. Please send me something. Please send me something. These are not empty words. This is a message to the writer. It's worth doing it. And he was doing it in miserable condition, in human condition. He had to have some glimmer that it's not only self-generating, that there is a listener. So Giedroyć, it's not only editor who actually put those things right out to us, but does a listener to those voices, which otherwise perhaps wouldn't have the strength to articulate those things. So I really feel tremendous gratitude to work like this, right? And I think those are the co-creators of those books, especially of those books which, look, how did we start conversation? He's unknown in Poland. He would never exist. like many others. So the correspondence between Bobkowski and Giedroyć is fascinating. Fascinating. Here, I just want to stress this element, what incredible persistence there was on the part of Giedroyć. Please, send me something.
Right.
He permitted, I believe, him to complete the work. And finally, in 1957, look at the dates. Finally, it appeared.
Right.
Non-existent in Poland, except literally a few copies. Bobkowski was one of the most vigilantly prohibited name in Poland,
Because he was such a strong anti-Soviet communist writer.
Which we are talking about, right? And then finally he appears in 95. That's when he appears in Poland.
Yes.
Right? He appears French. First he appears in France, in French. Before appearing, and then in 1995. So I'm very, very grateful for your questions.
Hang on. Please subscribe and click the bell to stay on top of the program. Watch the credits for some recommendations about how you can support aid for Ukraine and for Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. The Polish Cultural Institute New York sponsors our program. Bartek Remisko, head of Humanities and Literature at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, is our executive producer. Natalia Iyudin is my fellow producer and editor. Our opening and closing music is by Radek Przedpełski. Thank you all for listening and reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month for another encounter with Polish literature. See you then.
Jest to szary dzień, jak zawsze w tej okolicy. Cała sceneria dodaje się chwilami fotografiom z ilustrowanej gazety. Tak szare, tak płaskie są domy, ludzie i pojazdy.